Good morning, everyone. My name is Stuart Carroll. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Beck Technology. I'd like to welcome you to this morning's webinar. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to jump in and get going. So there's some significant changes this year with what Beck Technology is offering to the market. So in 2014, we had a single commercially available product called Profiler. In 2015, we're actually launching 3 products, or we have launched 3 products. We've also introduced a little bit of rebranding. So all of our products fit within a suite. We're calling the suite the Destini Suite. Each of our products is now has an icon with a letter corresponding to the name of the product. So Destini Profiler, Destini Estimator, and Destini Data Manager are the 3 products within the Destini Suite that we are offering this year. What I thought I would do next is quickly position the products, and then I'm actually going to go through product by product what it is that we've done and how they work. Looks like we may have a question already, Holly. Okay, I'm going to keep going, and we'll go from there. Okay, so Profiler is our virtual planning tool used at the conceptual and schematic phases of a project when there's a lot of uncertainty. Those of you, I'm sure, that have used it have used it where you receive some deliverable from an architect. Typically, if you're a GC, that may be a PDF for a potential concept. If you look at traditional methods of producing a conceptual estimate, it may be take off some quantities, use an on-screen takeoff, take those quantities into Excel. Our experience is as soon as you provide that number back to the owner, there are a number of rework loops that are usually undertaken as a result of the number not aligning with what the owner's expectations are. So Profiler enables you to create a model in which you can embed costs, and you can run different kinds of analysis so that you can work collaboratively with the architect and or the owner. And instead of having to retake off quantities, you can make changes to the model and see the impact on the cost and the schedule and all the other deliverables that you would normally give to the owner. At some point, the project gets to a go or no-go decision. Assuming it gets to a go decision, we have another product called Destini Estimator, which, as the name implies, is an estimating solution. Estimator was developed in partnership with Sunt Construction, one of our larger, more active customers. Estimator can take outputs from Profiler as the starting point for an estimate, or the user can create an estimate directly inside the Estimator product, or you can actually import an estimate from Excel into Estimator. Estimator is an easy-to-use, highly flexible estimating platform that requires next to no training. Many of Sunt's initial users of Estimator required no formal classroom-based training in order to get up and running. One of the key strengths of Estimator is its ability to provide intuitive comparative analysis to help the estimator understand what has changed between estimate iterations and why. And I'm going to go into more detail on both Profiler and Estimator in just a little bit. The third product in the suite is a support application, but it's a very important application called Destini Data Manager. Data Manager is a standalone tool that's also accessible from both Profiler and Estimator. Data Manager allows its users to create and manage cost databases for use by both Destini Profiler and Destini Estimator. So unlike a lot of products on the market where you have different data for detailed estimating and different databases for conceptual estimating, our suite enables you to manage one centralized database. And you can do that directly through Data Manager. So what I thought we would do real quick was take a look at Data Manager. Okay, so on the left of the user interface, we have an icon for each of the databases that the user has created. These databases can reside on the local machine or on other machines within the network. Just like with our 2014 release of DProfiler, we support 3 different flavors of database. So we have our own proprietary Beck technology database that I'll show you in just a little bit. We sell an RS means database configured for both Profiler and Estimator. And we also enable you in Profiler to connect to a Timberline database if you own the Sage Timberline Extended Estimating System. All right, I'm actually currently connected to a database, and you'll notice across the top we have a series of tabs. Each of the tabs represents different data constructs that are available within both Profiler and Estimator. So these should look very familiar if you've used DProfiler or any other estimating system, where we have the ability the user can define user-defined units of measure, variables, formulas, and then we get into Wbs properties. One of the major changes in the Beck technology database in 2015 is the fact that we've removed a notion of a primary classification. So in prior releases of our technology, we had the notion that you had a primary classification, which was used for organizing the data within the database. So if you said my primary classification is uniformat, you could view the data in the database and inside Profiler in a uniformat organized tree. In our 2013 release, we introduced the notion that you could add additional properties to any line item within your database. In our current release, in our 2015 release, we've extended this notion of work breakdown structure properties in such a way that we don't have a primary classification. You can define any number of Wbs properties, as shown here on the left. I've got some. They can be representative of a color, a date, a number, a dollar and cents value, a text, or a true and false value. If it's a text value, as shown here with a CSI value, you can not only define a single piece of text, you can define a drop-down of values that when the user sets that particular Wbs property, they can choose from a drop-down box. What this has done is enabled us, when we go to line items, to not organize the tree on the left by a primary classification, but rather to organize the tree based on any Wbs property that we have in the database. So for example, if I wanted to organize my tree of line items on the left about their CSI codes, I can do that. I can also name these. So I can actually give this a name like CSI 16 division. And at any point, I can then go backwards and forwards between one way of looking at the data and another way of looking at the data. So for example, if I now went in and said, well, instead of looking at it by CSI level 1 and level 2, we look at it by master format level 1 and level 2, the tree will automatically reorganize. And again, I can give this a name. So that I can easily move backwards and forwards between these different organizational structures. On the right in this particular window, if I select any one of the line items that I have within the database that I'm currently connected to, I get some basic information. So this should, again, look very familiar to those familiar with DProfiler. At the top, we have an item number, a description, and a unit of measure. On the drop-down box, we see the units of measure defined by the database administrator under the Units of Measure tab. We see we see up to 5 unit prices. We see the classifications that the user has defined using Wbs properties. And we actually have the drop-down boxes, as I mentioned, you can define for text-driven Wbs properties. We have quantification quantification formulas, and just like we had in Profiler, you can create formulas based on both parametric variables in the model along with user-defined variables within the database. A second feature that we've introduced into Data Manager is the ability that you can not only look at the data organized in a tree, but you can also look at the data organized in a data table. The data table supports copying and pasting from Excel. So one of the challenges that a lot of Beck technology new customers face when they start working with our technology is the need to create a database. So what I thought I would quickly do is move over from this sample database over to an empty database and show you how easy it is within the current Data Manager architecture to create a simple database. So I'm going to go over to the Database tab, and I'm going to, ahead of time I created an empty database. The way that you create a database is you click on this Connect to, whatever flavor you want. The Create button will become active, and you click on Create and give it a name. I'm going to click on the empty database. This will take just a couple seconds to load. And once it's done, I'm going to go over and just show you there are some defaults automatically put in for things like units of measure. You can change these just like you can anything else. You can remove a unit of measure. You can add your own unit of measure. There are no variables. There are no formulas. We do give you some default Wbs properties. These are the ones that we see most commonly used. If you don't want these, you can remove them. And then I'm going to go over to the line items. And you'll notice in the line items I have nothing in my tree. If I go over to the line item table view, I have nothing in my table view. So I'm going to bring up an Excel file that I prepared for this demonstration. The level of detail that you have is obviously dependent on your organization. I've picked off some line items from some past estimates. I've organized these into Excel. I've organized them actually in a specific way, and I'll show you what I mean by that in just a second. So over in the tab, in the line item tree view, just like inside Profiler, you can grab a column if you don't want it, and you can get rid of it. If you decide at some later point that you want to add a column back, you can right-click over the row at the top, bring up a column chooser, and drag those columns back out. But what I'm basically doing here is organizing my items inside the line item table view to match up with how I actually have them organized inside my Excel sheet. So inside my Excel sheet, I, for all intensive purposes, had item number description, unit of measure, a unit price, and then unit format codes for level 1, level 2, and level 3. There's a couple ways you can introduce data from Excel. One is just to copy a range. So it's one column, and you paste it. The way I'm going to do it, because I actually set up the columns to match, is I'm actually going to highlight this entire region. And I'm going to put it in the copy buffer simply by doing a Control-C. And then I'm going to go back over to the item number, and I'm going to do a paste. And what this has actually done is automatically created me line items with those properties that I brought in from the spreadsheet. You'll notice in all of mine, I'm not an estimator. I'm not portraying that I am. All of my unit prices in Excel I set to 0. If I'd have put unit prices, those would have come in, obviously. Back inside the line item tree view, if I click back, if I actually come in again and organize it by unit format, which I guess was not something I did before. So if I came in here and organized it by level 1, level 2, level 3, we'll actually see those line items automatically organized based off of the coding structure that I had inside the Excel file. Just like we had inside Profiler, you can also create assemblies. I'm not going to create any of these. If people are interested, we can definitely do follow-up webinars on these. We also support collections, which inside Profiler is how you map one or more line items or assemblies to a component in the object, in the model. And then we also have building types. So building types are sort of analogous to a cost model in other estimating systems. The last thing I want to point out, because this has come up as a request, is that not all companies want all estimators to have the ability to manipulate the unit prices within the Beck Technology database. They want to restrict who has write access. Every estimator can read data from a database, and they can manually change prices within the estimate. But by adding a name over to the right-hand side, you're giving that individual, in this case me, write access to the database. Okay. All right. I'm not going to give a show and tell on Profiler. We've done a lot of those webinars, and there's a lot on our YouTube channel. And we have some upcoming webinars also. But what I wanted to point out was some of the major changes that have gone into Profiler in the 2015 release. So there's about 15 major pieces. I'm not going to go through all of them, but the three that I think are most significant are this integration of Data Manager into Profiler and Estimator, meaning that you can use the same data within the same database within both products. So you can have both conceptual and detailed line items, if you so desire, within the same database. The other big part is we've changed the way that a lot of you start projects. So we've rewritten the way that we scale and import PDFs and images. And then the last way that we've made a major enhancement is that out of Profiler, you can export directly into Estimator. So I'm going to quickly just show you how easy that is. So I have a model inside Profiler. At the bottom, you can see some costs. The way that you export is that under the Export menu, we've introduced a new output format called Profiler Estimate. The Profiler Estimate will create a file on disk that you can, we call it a DPE file, a DProfiler Estimate file. You can save this as a name. So if we call this example. And then inside Estimator, you can open any of those DPE files directly. All right. So let's move over a little bit and quickly look at Estimator. So inside Estimator, you can always come up and open an existing estimate file. We support both DPE files, which are the output files from Destini Profiler, and also DST files, which are the native estimate files associated with Destini Estimator. I've already loaded one in the middle here that came from Profiler. There's a couple things I want to point out. The first thing I wanted to point out is that in the middle we have an estimate view. The estimate view should look and feel a lot like the estimate view that we had inside Destini Profiler. Each row represents an item of cost. Each column represents either a basic property of the line item, its number, its description, its units of measure, its prices, or a Wbs property. Just like we had inside both Data Manager and inside Profiler, if there are columns that we don't want, we can grab them and get rid of them. We can also use columns as a way of configuring or laying out the estimate. So for example, if I was to take one of those Wbs properties, master format level 4, and drag it up to the top of my my estimate window, it will give me a quick summary of those items in that particular format. So right now I'm just doing it by level 1. So if I expand my list of items underneath general requirements, I get a lot. If I was to grab the level 2 and drag it up, you'll see it condenses it into the level 2 classification structure. We can also, at any point, right-click and show, for example, maybe we want to show a summary of what is the cost of uniformat level 1 and level 2. So I'm going to take the sum of the aggregate cost column. I'm going to not prefix it with any text. And just like in Excel, I can control how it displays the numeric value. We can also name these layouts. So at any point I can come in and I can give it a name. And at any point I can then select from the list of named layouts how I want to look at the specific estimate. So if I wanted to, again, flip-flop between CSI or Uniformat, I can very quickly set up those layouts. Oftentimes, how you want to view the data is tied to the Wbs properties that you've defined within your database. So you can create standard ways of looking at your estimate based on how your company typically organizes its data, and you can share those across estimators. So you can actually set up estimators so that when every estimator launches Destini Estimator, they'll see your standard list of 16 division CSI, 50 division master format, your accounting codes, whatever layouts you want to set up. Okay, on the left of the estimate view, we have what we call the filter tree. The filter tree is a configurable tree that enables us to organize, again, the estimate. So I'm going to organize these by CSI level 1, level 2. And you'll notice by default that on the left I have all items within the estimate selected. And in the lower right-hand corner, I see my total cost and cost per square foot displayed. So I've got a direct cost of 33 million bucks. If I select on one of the subtrees, it's going to filter the estimate based on which line items match that particular Wbs property, and also give me what is the cost of that subset of items. These trees, just like the layouts, can also be named. So you can actually come back in at any point and go backwards and forwards for filtering just the same way that you would with layouts. You can also organize the filter tree by what we call system. So inside Profiler, you can create building masses, you can create sites, and then you can define general requirements that you associate with the project. When you import a DProfiler exported DPE file, you get this notion of a system, meaning that if I organize the tree by system and then by some classification scheme, it's actually going to show me the costs that went into building 1, or what costs went into the site, or what costs went into the general requirements. Inside Estimator, you can also add your own system items. So I'm not going to go into this in a lot of detail. But on the summary window on the right, we have a list of buildings, sites, and other. And you can select buildings that are already in the estimate, and you can track data. Or you can actually click on the little plus button and create a new building. So if I create a new building, I'm just going to call this building 2. Up here in the top of the estimate view, we have what we call the active system. The active system enables me to control when I add an assembly or a line item to my estimate, which system that item or group of items goes into. So just as an example, if I was to add an item from our database, let's just go in and something simple. Let's do a parking equipment allowance. If I double click on this item, where is it? Well, you'll notice that building 2 now all of a sudden shows up because I said the active system was building 2. If I click on building 2, there is our parking equipment allowance. Just like in Profiler, if there is something here that you needed to change, so I don't know why I would do this, but you'll get the idea. If I wanted 2 allowances and I wanted the allowance to be $45,000, I can make that change. I can change the description, the unit price, the Wbs Properties. If one of these is wrong, just like we had before, you can type in a new value, or you can pick a value from the drop-down box. Okay. Let's collapse this just so we get a little bit more real estate. The next thing I'm going to show you is that just like in many other estimating systems, we have reports. We have reports that many of you have seen in Profiler. If you create a report for Profiler, that report will also automatically work inside Estimator and vice versa. So we have the ability of creating crystal report-like reports. When we were developing Estimator, one of the things that we heard from Sunt and from other users was that in the 11th hour, a lot of estimators will export their data into Excel. The reason they typically do that, we were told, was that Excel has the ultimate flexibility associated with organizing and displaying your data. You don't need an IT person to update the crystal report. Anybody can update and use Excel. So instead of trying to replace Excel, we instead took the approach of embracing Excel. So inside Estimator, there is an embedded Excel-like window. No matter what Excel file you load, Estimator will load in some additional tabs of data. These tabs of data represent things like the line items within the current estimate. I'm stuck on Profiler versus Estimator. Estimator will automatically synchronize this data with whatever you have inside the estimate. So that parking allowance that I had is automatically updated to, I entered a quantity of 2. If I went back to this guy and said, well, actually, you have 1, you'll notice that the aggregate cost changed, and if I went back to the dashboard, Estimator has automatically updated that data. What this enables users to do is to create spreadsheets in which they can link their data that they want to use for reporting purposes directly to the estimate. And if I make a change to the estimate, that change will automatically be reflected inside the Excel file. So this is just an example of one that I've created ahead of time. It doesn't fit particularly well on the screen, but hopefully you can sort of get the idea. You'll notice over here, if I click on one of these cells, it's just using Excel links to go over to the line item sheet and pluck out pieces of data that happen to be in Building 1 and in Division A. So again, if I was to come back over to the filter tree and go back and organize my data by unit format, click on my substructure, and maybe over here, if I was to add maybe, again, I don't know why you would do this, but I'm going to make a change. The act of making the change will update the aggregate cost, so we went from $57,000 to $230,000. And back over here, it automatically updated my report. You can also use these reports for, instead of just being pie charts and summaries, you can actually use them for more detailed breakdowns of cost. So this is an EBS report, an element breakdown structure report, in which we have a classification structure on the left, and then we have each of the buildings that we've introduced into the estimate displayed along with their costs. All right, I'm going to come back to the dashboard in just a few minutes. The last area that I wanted to point out to everybody is what we call our comparison view. So currently within Estimator, I have one estimate loaded. You can add in as many estimates as you want. So I'm actually going to open a file where I've actually brought in 3 independent estimates that were created inside Estimator. So in this particular example, I have a baseline with 2 value engineering alternatives created inside Profiler. However, this ability to bring in one or more estimates could be used for comparing the current estimate with where we were at the end of DD versus where we were at the end of SD. Or it could be take the current estimate and compare it against a couple of past projects. Since Estimator doesn't really know what you're trying to do here, we provide you at 50,000 feet with the ability of adjusting the estimates. So again, if you're maybe bringing in a project from another city, you can use this as a way of regionally adjusting. If it's union versus non-union, you can adjust it that way. If there's a time adjustment, you can globally make a change. We don't provide you with those percentages, but rather the vehicle to apply a percentage. Once you've made any adjustments that you want, again at 50,000 feet, Estimator will provide you with a number of high-level dashboards showing you comparisons between the estimates you have loaded. So in this particular case, this is the data that we tracked across these 3 alternatives. Anything that is blue in either of these 2 columns is a difference to the baseline. We can also go in and look at, well, what were the total costs of the 3 options that we loaded. So the baseline's a $33 million estimate. We did a VE option where we removed a major cantilever condition, changed the structural frame, and played around with some of the skin materials, which significantly reduced the cost of the project. And then in the 3rd option, we actually built on the first alternative by replacing surface parking with structured parking. We can do the same and look at the indirects, or we can actually start to drill into the estimate. So we can use this particular dashboard to select how we want to organize the 3 estimates for a comparison. So for example, I've just selected CSI level 1. It provides for each division 3 bars, each bar representative of each of the 3 estimates that I had loaded. And we can use these for determining, what happened and why. So in this particular example, as I mentioned, we in option 3, we introduced a big parking structure. So we significantly increased the amount of concrete. Division 3 at 50,000 feet seems to make sense. Over here, something doesn't make sense. In Division 12, my estimators didn't knowingly change the TI on the project. However, in the baseline, we were at 4.6 million, and in the 2 alternatives, we dropped to almost 0. So this looks like an oops to me. Again, you can select any of the properties that you have in the databases as a way of organizing the 3 estimates. You can then actually start to drill down a little bit further. So maybe we, by default, again, have the estimates organized by CSI level 1, level 2. You can, just like we did before, you can right-click and reorganize the estimate based on any of the properties that you have associated with a line item. Or you can get rid of columns to reorganize the estimates. So in this particular case, we're organizing the 3 estimates by CSI level 1. The 3 groups of vertical bars show the baseline, next to the first alternative against the second alternative. The color coding shows both positive and negative variance, and we're currently color coding by percentage. So, for example, if we have an item like equipment, where in the baseline we had $45,000 of cost, we got rid of it over here, but then we put it back in over here, we see a color. The darker the color, the bigger the variance. You know, a $10,000 variance, even though it's 22%, is not that significant on a $30 million project. So instead, maybe by organizing it by percentage, we go in and organize it by cost. And then for any one of these items, we can drill in and look at every single line item and what happened in order to show us this particular cost variance. So this particular window shows me every line item organized horizontally. Just like we did before, if there are costs that we don't want or data that we don't want, we can get rid of it. We can also see the three values that were in each of the three estimates for those three line items. And again, the color coding is a way of enabling us to focus on what had the biggest impact on cost within this division. So looking at really dark red and really dark green is really where we want to start. We've seen some examples where within the same line item, we've seen both red and green. So for example, maybe on the baseline, the contractor noticed that that particular item, like curtain wall, was historically higher than what it should be. And maybe they went back in a particular design iteration to the subcontractor, and they figured out a way of reducing the unit price. Maybe they collaborated with the precaster so that the embeds for the curtain wall were manufactured directly into the precast panels. During the same iteration, the architect increased the amount of curtain wall that was on the project. The net of net was that the unit price went down, the quantity went up, the overall cost of that line item did not change. However, two decisions were made, one to reduce cost, one inadvertently to increase cost. So this enables you again to have a different kind of conversation with the owner. Is that what the owner wants? Do they want more curtain wall? Do they want, more design? Okay, the last thing I'm going to highlight is that this data within the estimates that you load can also be tied back into the dashboard so that we can report either again at a high-level dashboard as shown here or some detailed cost comparison that you want to create using Excel. All right. There's a lot more to estimate. I'm not going to go into all of these, but I've talked about direct costs. We also have indirects. There are ways that you can escalate and de-escalate line items. You can escalate a specific unit price, the whole project cost, by a dollar amount, by a percentage. You can copy, modify, add line items, assemblies. You can create estimates, specific line items. There's a lot of functionality inside Estimator, but based on time, I'm going to move on. All right. Okay, so we actually released Destini Estimator in April at our annual conference, and we're actually gearing up for what we're calling the suite release, where the version of Profiler with the enhancements that I mentioned earlier, that integrates with Data Manager, that also integrates with Estimator. We're shipping all three of those, and our intended release date is this quarter, so it's imminent. We've been actively testing it since Q1, so we're very close to releasing that. We're also actively working on our next release, which is planned for the year end. So there'll be some significant back-to-back releases of the suite. We're working pretty hard on 3 major groups of functionality. One that will benefit both Profiler and Estimator, the other 2 that will really benefit Estimator specifically. So unit prices inside the Beck Technology database are hard-coded. You specify so many dollars per piece of equipment, so many dollars per hour of labor, so many dollars per linear foot of material. We're extending that so that you can actually make up those prices based on resources, crews, and production rates. So if you are a self-performed contractor and you have data that drives those unit prices, you'll be able to define those within the Beck Technology database. And both products will benefit from those pieces of data. We're also extending our assembly functionality inside Estimator. And then the biggest piece of functionality is the integration of Navisworks with Destini Estimator, where you'll be able to define both 2D quantities if you have a PDF or a model, or you'll be able to use 3D objects as a way of quantifying your line items within your estimate. The user interface will be set up for an estimator, so it will be drag and drop. Whether the quantity comes from you sketching an area, a line, or a count, or whether it comes from a model, it will work the same way. You'll pick on the item, you'll drag it over the line item in your estimate, and then you'll get a choice as to which property of that takeoff item you want to drive the quantity of the line item within your estimate. Further, you'll get a visual representation of where the items in your estimate came from. So if you pick one or more line items, it will also highlight those either in your 2D takeoff or in the 3D model, depending on which items you associated with your line items. We'll be doing some live demos of both the version I showed today and the end-of-year version at Autodesk University later this year. And if anybody's interested in learning anything more about either the 2015 version that I highlighted today or the 2016 version that's imminent at the end of the year, please reach out and let us know. The last thing I wanted to quickly highlight was that there was a presentation given by Sunt Construction and their national head of pre-construction at the recent BIM forum in San Diego. And if anybody would like to watch that, it's about a 17-minute video in which he talks about their need to develop a downstream product from Destini Profiler and working with us in the development of Destini Estimator. Feel free to reach out to us. We'll give you this link, or if you're quick, you can probably write the link down right now. But we'd be more than happy to share that with you. The last thing before I open it up to questions is we have one of our customers tentatively scheduled to present on Destini Profiler on August the 19th, and we'll be sending out invitations to that webinar very shortly. So without further ado, I'll open it up for questions. All right. It says, you mentioned Timberline integration. What does that look like? And that was, okay, so let's talk about that. So if you're using Destini Profiler, you can connect to a Timberline database that you've managed using Data Manager. So you, in essence, point towards the PEI file within Timberline, which is the entry point for their database. And inside Profiler, you will see your line items, assemblies, variables, unit prices, Wbs properties, as if they were natively created inside Profiler. So if you create a slab in Profiler, you can manually associate line items or take off assemblies driven off of that slab inside Profiler. You can also set up automation so that maybe you create a building type inside Profiler, and in that building type you say, every time I draw one of these slabs, here is the assemblies and line items that should automatically be applied to that slab. And here are the parametrics of that slab that drive the takeoff of that assembly or line item. And if people wanted to see that, we'd be more than happy to set up a show and tell on the Timberline integration. Okay, so one of the questions that came up was, what about integration to on-screen takeoff? So we're not discounting integration with on-screen takeoff, but one of the things that we've observed in talking to different customers is it appears that estimators are currently using 1, 2, or 3 products for creating estimates. They're typically using some flavor of a 2D takeoff tool, on-screen takeoff, plan, Swift, e-takeoff, whatever the flavor is. They're then using another product for extracting quantities from models if they get models. It could be Celebri, it could be Innovia, it could be Assemble. There's a whole bunch of 3D model-based takeoff tools. And then they're typically using an estimating platform and or Excel as a middleware. So, 1, 2, 3, or 4 products. And in talking to estimators, it seems like you get caught in this copy and paste hell. You go to a 2D and you copy it and you want to paste it in Excel, and then you do some math and then you paste it from Excel into your estimating tool, and then you go from your 3D tool to Excel. So our whole thing is, why do you need 3 or 4 products? Why wouldn't you have a single product that enables you to take off if you want to take something off? If you want to get at a model, you can get at that model. And those takeoffs, whether it be 2D or 3D, are dynamically tied to your estimate. So our intention with our estimator product is to release one tool at the end of the year that supports 2D takeoff like you would in an on-screen. It supports 3D takeoff like you would in any of the model-based takeoff tools, and ties those graphically to the line items. The other thing that we heard when it comes to models is that estimators don't typically trust the quantities. They typically don't trust the quantities for a number of reasons. Maybe it was modeled wrong, or one of the VDC or virtual building group or whatever the company name for the BIM Ninja is, has provided the estimator with that list of quantities. Well, if the estimator doesn't know where the quantity came from, how can they trust it? So one of the things we're doing with the Autodesk Navisworks integration is providing a single platform that if you have a quantity, you can use it. If you don't trust the quantity, draw over the top of that quantity. Maybe it's a model, and you know that the wall doesn't go from top of slab to underside of deck above. Maybe there's a 3-foot plenum. So draw over the top of the model with an area. Use that area, multiply by the thickness of the wall as a way of quantifying how you want that wall to be applied to a line item. So our intention is to have one integrated suite that does 2D, 3D, and estimating. All right, the question was, next question was, can you use either Sage Estimating Database Structure, SQL, or the Sage Original Database Structure? So we currently do not support the Sage SQL database structure. We're evaluating whether we are going to upgrade to that particular structure. There's a number of significant changes that Sage has made that require us to go back and re-implement. It's not just a simple push a button and upgrade. We would have to re-implement the way that we pull data backwards and forwards from Sage Timberline. We are evaluating that, and we'll have a decision before the end of the year. But currently, we support the original pervasive database structure that Sage has, and so hopefully that answers that question. Okay. In the database, will there be a way to show multiple background data for a single cost item, such as bids? This would use a container field where PDFs can be stored. So one of the things I didn't show, so the answer is yes. The text WBS value can also, it's a rich text field, meaning that you can actually support hyperlinks. So you can actually hyperlink to a document stored outside of the database. You can also copy and paste data directly into that multi-line text field. You can also, there is a notes field and an image field automatically associated with every line item. Those are non-WBS properties. Those are just standard properties. So you can actually put images. You can have links to sections or spec documents or a website. You have images of the assembly, images of the line item defined at the database level, that whenever you use that line item also get moved into the estimate, whether that estimate comes from Profiler or from Estimator. I want to thank everybody for spending the last hour or so with me. Like I said earlier, we're going to publish this to our YouTube channel. You'll each get a link to the video, and we'll be sending you out further information about the next upcoming Destini Profiler webinar in the next couple of weeks. So look forward to speaking to everybody soon, and thanks again. Okay, so there was one more question. So does the dashboard tool come with Estimator? Yeah, Estimator, the Estimator comes as one product. So everything that I showed you today is within the Estimator product. It is priced on a subscription basis. So I'm not going to talk specifically about pricing. This is definitely not a sales presentation. But if people would like to follow up about pricing, they can do that. But Profiler is offered in one of two flavors. It can be bought as a perpetual license, meaning you pay one time and then pay for maintenance and support annually for upgrades. Estimator is just a subscription, meaning it's so many dollars per concurrent license per month. And you can also buy Profiler and Estimator bundled as a suite on a subscription basis. So if anyone is interested in learning more about those, I'd be happy to take some offline emails. Once again, thanks for all our friends for joining, and we'll end the webinar right now. Thank you.